This is Liz, and the book I'm reading is Dear Zoo. I went to the zoo to send me a pet. They sent me a elephant. He was too big, so I sent him back. They then sent me a giraffe. He was too tall, so I sent him back. So they sent me a lion. He was too fierce, so I had to send him back. So they sent me a, look at this one, camel. He was too grumpy, so I sent him back. So they sent me a snake. He was too scary, so I sent him back. So they sent me a monkey. He was too naughty, so I sent him back. So they sent me a frog. He was too jumpy, so I sent him back. So then they thought very hard and sent me a puppy. He was perfect and I kept him. The end.
Hi, my name is Bob Szczepanski, and I'd like to tell you a story about George Washington Carver. And any of you kids out there eating PB&J sandwiches, you probably wouldn't be if it wasn't for this African-American scientist. So here goes. George Washington Carver was someone people looked up to. He overcame slavery and became a scientist. When poor black farmers could not grow cotton, George taught them how to grow peanuts. George became famous for finding new ways to use peanuts, and he never cared about money or fame. He committed his life to helping others. This is the story of George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver was born around 1864 on a Missouri farm. George's parents were slaves, and his father died in an accident before George was born. Now, when George was a baby, slave stealers took George and his mother from their home. The two were separated, and George never saw his mother again. Several weeks later, Missouri farmers Moses and Susan Carver found George and brought him back to their home. The Carvers, who disliked slavery even though they had owned slaves, raised George as their own son. As a young boy, George loved plants. After doing chores, he'd wander through the woods and the meadows, and he wondered why some plants were so small and others were tall, and he wondered why some grew in the sun while others grew in the shade. And to find the answers, George grew a garden and did many experiments with soil, water, and sunshine. By the time George was 8 years old, he knew a lot about plants, and the neighbors even called him the plant doctor. Now, George loved to learn. He wanted to go to school, but he wasn't allowed to do so. At the time, schools near his home were only for white children. When George was about 10 years old, he left home. He walked to a school for black children that was about 8 miles away. And when George arrived at the school, a black couple took him in. He earned his keep by doing chores, and after George learned as much as he could, he moved to another place and another school. George continued studying plants and became an archaeological and agricultural scientist. He taught at Iowa State University. The school had a laboratory and a greenhouse. Now, one day, George got a letter from Booker T. Washington. Now, Booker T. Washington was a former slave, and he was the founder of a college in Alabama called the Tuskegee Institute. He begged George to teach at his school. Booker said he had nothing to offer except hard work and a chance to help poor black farmers. Now, George knew this is what he was meant to do. George arrived at Tuskegee Institute in 1896, and everywhere he looked, the land was bare and wasted. Local farmers had grown cotton until the soil was worn out. Now, George taught students and the farmers who asked him for help. He showed them how to feed the soil and rotate crops. And when the fields produced cotton again, the people cheered. Now, sadly, before the farmers could harvest the cotton, beetles ate the cotton plants. Nobody knew how to stop them. Well, George noticed that the beetles did not eat peanut plants, and he told the farmers to grow peanuts instead. Now, when the farmers harvested the peanuts, however, nobody wanted to buy them. Peanuts were just used for hog feed. Well, George felt terrible about this mistake, and he shut himself in his laboratory and did experiments around the clock. In only 2 days, George discovered that peanuts were an amazing plant. Peanuts were good for making cooking oil and milk and cheese and other things. So George shared his discoveries about peanuts by inviting businessmen to a special lunch. He served soup, a chicken loaf, vegetables, ice cream, and cookies. And the guests enjoyed their meal. Now afterwards, George told his guests that the lunch had been made all from peanuts. Now, as word spread about this amazing plant, people across the country began buying peanuts. Now, in time, George discovered more than 300 ways to use peanuts. He also found many ways to use cowpeas and sweet potatoes and soybeans and cotton. One peanut product was used to treat thousands of people suffering from polio. Candy bars, peanut butter, dyes, cosmetics, inks, and much more can all be made from peanuts. George's discoveries made him famous throughout the world, but he didn't care about fame or money. He believed he was successful and only if it helped others. George Washington Carver died on January 5th, 1943, at about age 80 years old. He was a true hero. He improved the way people farmed and helped millions of people make better lives for themselves. The end.
Hi there, my name is Helen Parr. You might also know me as Elastigirl or Mrs. Incredible. Today I'm going to read for you Disney Pixar's The Incredibles. I don't think I can turn the pages, so I have to take off my gloves. The Incredibles. It was the golden age of supers. It was a time when heroes like Mr. Incredible, Elastigirl, and Frozone kept the world safe from all kinds of danger. It was an exciting time. Built like a tank and 10 times as rough, Mr. Incredible was known for his super strength. Elastigirl's stretching abilities made her as flexible as she was fierce. They made a powerful pair. Then times changed. People complained that the supers were making a mess of things. The government forced them into hiding. Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl fell in love and got married. They tried to live a normal life. They became Bob and Helen Parr. The Parrs moved to a house in the suburbs and raised a family. They had a daughter named Violet, a son named Dash, and a baby boy named Jack Jack. Like their parents, the kids were supers. Violet could turn invisible and create force fields, while Dash, true to his name, could run really fast. Zoom! Jack Jack's powers were still unknown. He wasn't even potty trained. Banned from showing their powers in public, Bob and Helen used them around the house instead. But Bob was bored with being normal. He passed the time in his new job wishing he was still doing his old job, being a super. One day his wish came true. A mysterious woman named Mirage gave Bob a top-secret mission. This was a job for Mr. Incredible. You can still do great things. Bob's supersuit had been damaged in battle. He visited fashion designer Edna Mode and asked her to make him a new one. No capes. With his new supersuit, Mr. Incredible was back in business. Mirage led him to a private island and into a trap. Mr. Incredible was caught in the clutches of a robot known as the Omnidroid. The trap had been set by an evil genius named Syndrome. As a boy, Syndrome wanted to be Mr. Incredible's sidekick. When that didn't happen, Syndrome became very angry. I work alone. Syndrome wanted revenge. He created high-tech gadgets to destroy Mr. Incredible with one day, and that day was today. When her husband didn't return home, a worried Helen visited Edna. Helen was shocked to learn that Bob was Mr. Incredible again, and that he was in terrible danger. Luckily, Edna had made new supersuits for the entire Parr family. They were about to go on a rescue mission. After leaving Jack with the sitter, Elastigirl set out to save Mr. Incredible. Violet and Dash secretly followed. They wanted to help too. Bob was happy to be reunited with his fantastic family. At that moment, they were no longer the Parrs, they were the Incredibles. Suddenly, the Incredibles were surrounded by Syndrome's soldiers. Mr. Incredible heaved the hovercrafts high overhead. Elastigirl stretched out to make several long-distance strikes. Dash ran circles around the guards, and Violet trapped them in an unbreakable force field. The Incredibles realized the best superpower of all was teamwork. When the fight was over, the Incredibles raced to capture Syndrome. The villain was in a rocket headed toward the mainland. He was going to unleash the Omnidroid onto the city. The Incredibles would never make it there in time. Fortunately, Mirage had a change of heart. She felt sorry for her part in Syndrome's plot and led the supers to one of his spare rockets. The Incredibles thanked her and were soon blasting off into their next battle. Who's super now? When the supers arrived, the Omnidroid was tearing up the town. Syndrome watched, cackling with glee. The Incredibles tried everything to defeat the giant robot. Even with the icy help from Frozone, the Omnidroid seemed unstoppable. Then Violet saw that Syndrome was using a remote control to make the Omnidroid move. The supers stopped fighting the robot and went after Syndrome. They snatched the remote control and turned the Omnidroid against him. An energy beam blasted Syndrome out of the sky. With Syndrome defeated, the heroes tricked the Omnidroid into destroying itself. The city was saved. Citizens gathered to celebrate the return of the supers. The supers felt good to be back. They felt incredible. The end.